Hi, I'm David Lacase. I'm one of the founding members of Congress Square Park, Friends of Congress Square Park, and I'm now the board president of Friends of Congress Square Park. A little bit of history to start with. The park was built in 1982. It was part of an urban renewal project for the whole of Congress Square. It has had various levels of success throughout the years, mainly depended on whether we had a parks department or not in Portland, which has come and gone several times over the last 20 years. It always functioned pretty well as an event space, but it really never functioned very well on a day-to-day basis. In 2008, the city formed a committee of local stakeholders to review the park and to make recommendations of what to do with it. In 2010, they voted unanimously to keep it a park. However, in 2012, the city decided to sell 2/3 of the park to the Westin Hotel for an event center. So in 2013, the Friends of Congress Square Park was formed to counter this proposed sale and to make the square a functioning park with this mission. And as we were formed and started, this is what we were given as a park. The city at that time had no parks department. As you can see, we had a bare sunken space. There was no seating left. At this point, the parks were managed by the Public Works Department, and they didn't like the people that were sitting in the park, so their solution was to remove all the seating. Basically, the city at that point had no parks department. The park was a sunken bare space. There was no seating left. Had many hiding places, like you can see behind the clock and in the back corners. It had poor access if anyone did want to go in. And as you can see, the planting areas were pretty much mulch. So while we were still trying to stop the sale of the park, we decided that we had to prove that the space could be successful and that people would come if there was a reason to do so. So the first thing we did is we got a grant for an artist to build a bench. And we started to hold some really basic events. So this was the World Cup. We brought our TVs from home and hung them from a couple of poles. And indeed, we had at some of the games 50 to 100 people. We also had some music events. And as you can see, we had very little seating and it's still very sparse. We then managed to buy 3 tables and chairs, had the bench, and had some food trucks. This was not a planned event, but it looks pretty cool. At the same time, we started working with Project Public Spaces to figure out how to actually create a community gathering space. We did a lot of their quicker, lighter, cheaper process. We also engaged with Caitlin and the city and did a bunch of visioning to see what the public wanted to see in the space. From that, we developed our marketing scheme, which was do whatever you could do in the square. So then we worked with Project Public Spaces and received a Southwest Heart of the Community grant, which allowed us to buy essentially enough furniture and amenities to fill the park. So it turns out, as we were doing the visioning also, that we discovered that Congress Square Park is located in the most socially and economically diverse area of the city. Across from the park is the Portland Museum of Art. At the back of the park is the 4-star Westin Hotel. On the side of the park is a low-income elderly disabled housing. And 1 block away from the park is some of the most expensive housing in Portland. And for some of the people that live in this area, this is essentially the only outdoor space they have access to. So once we were able to secure the space in the park, as I said, we worked with PPS and got a grant and bought a bunch of amenities. As part of the grant, getting the grant, we also had to sign an MOU with the city, making the Friends Group the official place managers of the park. So in 2015, we hosted 35 events. We also, the Westin, who was trying to buy the park, now became one of our major park supporters and donors, and they had an outdoor cafe in the park for 2 years. They don't anymore. In 2016, we hosted 100 events and had a volunteer ED. In 2017, we hosted 150 events with a paid part-time executive director. And as you can see, we're having a lot of different kinds of events. In 2018 and 2019, we hosted over 200 events each year with a full-time ED and an operating budget of about $100,000. You can see we had a lot of events, dancers. Some of the dances, we'd have 400 to 500 people at the dance. We also had, as part of the grant, we bought a screen and a projector and sound systems. And so we had movies on Sunday night. And in the winter, we did, as we couldn't do events, we decorated the trees and did lighting. This year, obviously, we've held very few events. We've focused on improving the amenities and plantings. We spend about $1,000 a year on plants and have focused on improving the amenities and plantings. At the end of 2019, we had about 50 volunteers doing cleaning, event coordinating, gardening, et cetera, donating hundreds of hours each year. So this is what the park looks like at the end of this year. As you can see, the plantings will look good. There's people using it, even though there are no events. We are also one of the partners in the Congress Square Rebuild, which is a project to rebuild not just the park, but the entire square, which Caitlin and Misa will talk about. So obviously, we've managed to build a pretty interesting and usable park, but it's actually a very thin veneer that looks good, and the structure is pretty much crumbling underneath, which is why we are talking about redesigning it. One of the things we've done is we've constantly experimented to see what works and what doesn't work. The physical access is still not very good. And it turns out that the sunken space, which everybody said was a disaster for a park, turns out to be a really good feature in a park that's in one of the major intersections of the city, because it gives you a very secure feeling when you're in there with all the traffic buzzing around you.
David. Now I'd like to introduce Caitlin, who is with the City of Portland as an urban designer, urban planner. And welcome, Caitlin.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Caitlin Cameron. I'm the urban designer for the City of Portland, and I'm the project manager for the Congress Square redesign effort. And the David, Friends of Congress Square Park, they've really fostered a sense of belonging and inclusivity with their efforts so far, between the new furniture, the events, the volunteer, the maintenance. So you might be asking why redesign if you've created this environment that is sort of the epitome of an urban public space. But as David hinted at, Congress Square is a highly visible and trafficked intersection. And it's in the center of our arts district and on the main street of Portland's Peninsula. But the square is very busy. There are fast moving cars, and cars have really dominated the intersection since the urban renewal effort to create that particular traffic flow and pattern and the park spaces. And there are also physical barriers there that limit access to certain groups of people. There are uneven surfaces. There's the 4-foot grade change. There's the intersection itself, which is very wide and difficult to navigate. And there are elements that make the space less hospitable, such as the lack of seating options, although now that's improved somewhat with the movable chairs and tables, but also barriers to visibility into the space. There are the many steps that provide seating during events, but also can create physical barriers for some to enter the park. And there's a lack of elements sometimes, although again improved with the plantings and the movable tables and chairs, but until those went in, there wasn't much in the space to make it inviting or feel lively unless an event was going on. The other thing that we noticed is a privatization of the space, that when unwanted behaviors are going on, that also makes the park feel less inviting and less inclusive to all. And then, you know, because the Friends of Congress Square Park have fostered such a strong community here with the volunteers and the events, there are some things that could be better accommodated or facilitated with a redesign effort. So we're interested not only in accessibility and creating a sense of belonging in the physical design itself, which Misa will get into as well, but also given the high profile of this project for the city of Portland, staff have been very conscious of partnerships, inclusivity, and participation in the design and planning process. We view the whole community as a partner in this project. And we approach accessibility with physical design, but also in the planning and design process. So we thought a lot about ways of making the planning and design process inclusive. And we also wanted to make sure the design effort and goals around accessibility, identity, inclusivity, that they were achievable and something that could be not just a pipe dream or a concept, but that we could actually make specific to the populations that we're serving. So that the efforts that have gone into the space already have really helped us learn and see how people want to use the space and who's showing up, who's there. So I think a key part of all of this is partnerships. From the beginning, it's beneficial to include key stakeholders as project partners. So this is a unique setup for the city because in addition to the several city departments, planning, parks, public works, that are involved in the project as a city project, we also have Friends of Congress Square Park and the Public Art Committee as project partners and involved from the beginning of the design and planning process. And having that diversity among the decision makers, you know, studies time and time again have shown diversity leads to better decision making and outcomes, and is this way it's more inclusive and representative of the different people who have to maintain the space, use the space, and those kinds of, all of those perspectives are being covered by this partnership setup. And, you know, having the partnerships as a foundation of the project from the beginning leads to better, more inclusive outcomes, but also has made the participation in the fundraising efforts broader as well and more successful. So just a couple of things about the vision and design process. So we had a lot of different ways that we went about gathering information and having a visioning. People who spend a lot of time in this space are the ones who should be telling you what they want and need, what's not working now. So the project partners use a combination of techniques to determine the vision and goals and programmatic needs for the redesigned Congress Square. And Friends of Congress Square were instrumental in collecting data. You can see some examples here. And also the programming, as I said, that has happened already is key data. And there were also studies done around circulation and how people are using the space. And the planning office really thought about different ways to be inclusive in this sort of data gathering and visioning process. For example, posters and meeting announcements included translations into 4 other languages. We used Neighborland to brand the vision process and collect ideas through social media, such as Twitter, online surveys, traditional in-person facilitated meetings. But we also thought about how to be inclusive in our process for people without internet or smartphones, or who otherwise might want to be anonymous in their feedback. And so we had these billboards in the space itself and at City Hall with Sharpies where people could tell us what they wanted in Congress Square. And the resulting vision statement and program for the project came from all of this visioning inputs, but also the crafting of the vision statement and the program were opened up to stakeholders to provide edits and suggestions and comments to fine tune those documents that were then used to go out and select our consultants. So we did go through an RFQ process. The project also includes a public art commission as well as the landscape and urban design. So in addition to the community stakeholder representation on our project team, we also looked for ways to have the public play a role and be inclusive, included in the throughout the project's life. So not just the visioning, but also the selection actually of our consultants, which is again a unique situation. It's not typical to have such a public process around an RFQ for consultants. Another thing to mention is it was our original goal to have the public artist work collaboratively with the landscape architect to make sure that the public art was not something that was an afterthought or it sort of came after. So these were selected basically at the same time to work in tandem. So when it came to selecting these consultants, we held public presentations and panel discussions with the finalists. We also had survey cards. I mean, these were all open to the public at the PMA, the Museum of Art auditorium. We had survey cards to gather feedback, which informed our final selections. And the project partners, Friends of Congress Square Park and the Public Art Committee, were also a part of the selection team, the interview team, which is unusual for our typical internal RFQ process. And the project partners selected WRT in part because of their commitment to an inclusive public process And the initial design phase included a 3-day workshop and open houses where public, and this is in a co-working space on the main street of Portland, so very visible, and the public and stakeholders could walk by that storefront and observe or participate and provide critique, see the design work in action, come and go. And so the hope is for broad community buy-in and ownership of the end result due to all of this direct participation and input. So just a couple more points on the design itself. So having all of this process hopefully is leading us towards an equitable and inclusive and accessible design and result. And so some of the inclusive concepts or programmatic elements part of that design include all season use and visual interest, day and night use with safety and visibility, variety of seating types and different conditions, accessible to all abilities and ages, access to art in public free setting, access to Wi-Fi, which the Friends group has been able to provide for a number of years at this point. And also the opportunity for that outdoor dining to continue for the adjacent businesses. So this is a rendering of our design development for the space. This is, again, it includes the intersection as well as the park spaces. So, you know, that idea of accessibility is not just the pedestrians in the park, but, you know, thinking about right now, the cars, the vehicles really dominate the intersection. So there's a major goal here to rebalance the intersection in addition to the park spaces towards complete streets, having them be more multimodal and safe for hearing impaired, visually impaired, and those kinds of considerations as well. So just I'll close with a quick lessons learned. This kind of partnership, having a public-private partnership project team definitely comes with challenges. It's more cumbersome to coordinate schedules, for example, or it can be difficult to find consensus and keep the conversation on track and provide feedback to the consultants in a cohesive, unified way. But it definitely adds time and effort to do a project in this way. But there have been so many benefits, including my own personal appreciation and buy-in for the project. It's in my neighborhood, and you know, I live and work here as well. And so there's just such a strong connection for this place and the people I am working with and for. So that's sort of my piece on the whole deal, and I'll turn it over to Misa.
Great, thanks so much, Caitlin. That was great. Yeah, this is certainly an exercise in placemaking. So it's not just creating a park, but it's creating a place. And as the Project for Public Spaces points out, there are 4 key ingredients to think about. You need to think about the sociability. You need to think about uses and activities, which are going to happen there, access and linkages, not only physical, but visual and other ways, and then comfort and image. Do people feel comfortable? Is it sittable? Can they hang out? So that's really great. And now I'd like to introduce Misa. Misa, you want to unmute yourself? Misa is with WRT Design in Philadelphia. She's a landscape architect, and she has worked on the redesign of this place for going forward.
Hi, everyone. This is Misa Chen. I'm a landscape architect, senior associate with WRT. Our main office is in Philadelphia. We also have an office in San Francisco. So today for my part, I'll be focused on in terms of how to make or the strategy to make a public space for everyone. Continue the conversation from David with the Congress Square, Prince of Congress Square Park, that has been activating the space over the years and with project partners from the cities and other stakeholders. And really for our task, it's more of how can we as a design team continue that momentum to reimagine the public space that's already well beloved, activated. People know where to go if they need a tiny getaway space in the downtown art district here in Portland, Maine. So just to, you guys probably more familiar than myself from Philadelphia in terms of, geographic distance and all that, but just kind of pulled out from where we are here looking into the intersection. So when we joined the project, we're tasked to really re-envision the overall intersection as a whole, and we call Congress Square. Congress Square Park, it's part of the corner there, surrounded by, the State Theatre. We have this historic H.H. Hay building at the little triangle wedge shape there, and we have PMA Museum of Art right here. So to look into that, how to transform the overall intersection and with a cohesive design. Here, really briefly, just kind of picking up from part of the process that David and Caitlin already mentioned, and really from design team's point, what is our design process here as part of that inclusive process? So kind of fast backtrack there, back in 2016, May 4th, we had an interview with the city in the morning. The same day, evening, we also had a public presentation to share our thoughts. And it certainly was a very unique situation where we get to have more focused conversation with the client group. Same time, we get to share our thoughts, our team strategies, and some of our ideas with the larger community folks at that location. Here you can see we actually had the public presentation at the PMA there that evening. So when project started, kickoff later that October, we start off with a workshop. So it's one of the 3 workshops that we envision to have. Despite that, there has been a lot of conversation, discussion, and throughout the visioning process that Friends of Congress Square Park and the city have done, and also with PPS as well. Really from our design team point is now we have kind of settled for a certain larger vision statement, and we wanted to refine it into a goal and coming with the design strategies and start to coming work toward implementation plan and all that. So the first engagement meetings, and we start the day as a workshop. That's basically a site visit, but in a way we task into more like a focus group. We talk about planting, we talk about historic architecture context, we talk about multi-programming and activations. So the participation, almost a whole day long event, and that we tackle and understanding and learning the site through this focus subject here. Once we visit the site, we went back to the workshop space, start to have more focus on breaking into smaller groups, as we call the stakeholder charrettes. You see kind of the photo to the right here. We broke into a couple, we have fortunate to have really nice kind of set out in terms of the workshop space. So we have kind of rooms by rooms and sketching out, and through our understanding. There was a 3 days event, and at the end of each day, we also had a public meeting, means that we kind of ping up whatever information we have, sort of organize it and share with the public what we learned, what we progressed throughout the day. So that has been really helpful in a way, is how to start to re-engage the community, from the early on, the envisioning stage through this kind of design implementation phase here. Continuing, we have another 2 kind of community engagement meetings. It's kind of every other 2 months that we check in with the community and share with them what's our progress and what we're up to, and continue to really refine our design through incorporating the comments and feedback and any other things that we overlooked. As you can see, it's a very well-beloved space, and everybody knows the place more than probably we do. So they know what the daily basis need, what the seasonal needs, and what's working, what's not working. So with all that anticipation and engagement, We kind of arrived somewhat the schematic design wrapped up in 2017 in a way, and continue moving on in terms of, you know, design refinement, the design development as we call. It was completed 2 years ago, 2018. And so currently we're working with Maine DOT and other CG agencies just to continue pushing through the project and waiting for kind of the next stage in terms of to wrapping up the construction documentation. So a very quick one is how we to get from here, as you can see, the current day, it's well used, seasonal, you know, interest out there. How we get from here to a overall transformation here. So that in the next couple of slides, short, probably 8 to 9 minutes, whatever time I have, you will get to kind of learn and hear a little bit of kind of design strategies and tools that we use in terms of to transform the space. Here, just to kind of distill from the visioning statement here, understanding the project goal to create a welcoming, inclusive Congress Square Park, celebrate local arts and culture, foster spontaneity while remaining accessibility to and inviting to all. So we refine into kind of 3 perspectives that could bring positive social wellness, accessibility, and identity impact to it. How can we continue to reinforce some of these aspects, some of the strategies that we kind of outline in terms of, you know, social and wellness? We aim to create a space that can support year-round, day-to-night, active versus passive or contemplative activities. Some kind of experience that is not that you walked in and you learn it all. You have the elements of discovering, and hence you create the curiosity and interest, you know, from time to time when you visit the space. Obviously, it has been, you know, a place that people know how to get around and walk around into the park. But we wanted to use this redesign as opportunity to think about it. Can we make the space a more fluid? How people arrive, how people see each other, how people meet each other. Do we need to, what kind of arrival experience you want to create it, and for all ages and abilities. Also, one of the subjects that from the community that we heard is in terms of the identity. As you can kind of recall that axon location map that I outlined in the beginning of the presentation, is sort of in the center of on Congress Street corridor. You have the monument there. You have the Monument Square on one side, and then the other end is a one Longfellow Square, which are beloved, but they doesn't really, the program and then the context itself doesn't really support in terms of more lush green note, which, you know, planting could be something that can really kind of showcase a seasonal interest, and you see the change of season, something like that. So we wanted to kind of utilize in terms of the planting, the material, and also by, you know, activation program, is there the way we can kind of advance more of that cultural economic benefit here and to bring in a full cohesive identity to this place. So a couple inclusive design elements in the following slides here. The first one, we look into just understand the current entry point here. I don't know if you can see the cursor that I'm moving, but if you look at the image to the left, you can see that these kind of granite larger stairs, they have been iconic in a way, and they can be really helpful when there's a larger event and people can sit on them and enjoy the space. However, that also create almost a barrier for some people to how they arrive into this, as David called, kind of the sunken space here. So to your left-hand side, there's a accessible route you can route it through and back of the stage and then through the little planting area and arrive back to the central plaza. Or there's a mini ramp behind that kind of the clock tower there. Not necessarily the best arrival entrance, but you can get down there if you have stroller, you disable, you just, you know, can. And really interesting to see like how people can arrive to the center place without being separated in a way, say, hey, I will meet you in the plaza, then I'm gonna go take the ramp, I'm gonna use the steps, or I have to route all the way through the back of the stage and come back to the central area here. So here's kind of just outline in terms of the permeability, how people can really enter this sunken space in a way that still you can provide a comparable entry experience. How can we all go visit the park together? This is some of the technical study we went through to understand the current characters. You see the green kind of arrow, that's where kind of flush condition, people can come in, and a little ramp as the blue color outline behind the clock tower there. And can we take this character and transform into something that can be more fluid and people understand the kind of hierarchy, where it's a main entrance, where will be the accessible route, and without thinking, feel like I have to take a alternative route to get in there. So we took a numerous study just to start to reimagine this space as a continuous surface, and understanding that the sunken character is still very light, what people feel like that's unique about Congresswood Park. We wanted to maintain still somewhat sunken character, so we make it a continuous space, like gently press it down, cut it through with say stairs at the intersection area as to acknowledge the main entrance, but allowing a rest of the boundary as accessible as possible. So then people can take different routes. Despite they're gonna go to the stage, they're gonna enter the main park area. They're gonna go through, the kind of to your right-hand side there, and behind the planting more like a planting area there. The close-up look here, just to demonstrate it's a rather more fluid arrival experience as well, that people can, get to enjoy and how to get to the center of the park without feeling that the stair character is hindering how they arrive there. So once we understanding more of the circulation and arrival experience, the next thing, and that is quite a kind of a core to this Congresswood Park in terms of the programs and activations. There are programs for everyone currently, and we wanted to make sure that the redesigned Congresswood Park can continue to accommodate that aspect, programs for everyone. So we can see here just some of the examples out of 200 programs that David mentioned, from small, medium, large to extra large. When there are civil and social movement, it's not even just Congresswood Park, but it extends to all intersection. So how you really can kind of think about a space, give it the intentionality, but same time balance with the flexibility. These are some of the early on diagrams, super high level, but we wanted to think about it, Congresswood Park, and when there's a special event that will extend through the intersection, and maybe some of the wall space, we can also think about it and activate them as part of that program activation. So after all the bubble diagram fitting into the site on top of the layer of that circulation, then we start to carve out the space. And really this is testing through a numerous kind of back and forth, working with the city and Friends of Congresswood Park to understand, the size of the dance mat would be, how many would they usually use, the size of the typical like movie nights and what the size would be. So every pocket are all intentionally laid out, but without looking, in a way, is when there's no event, there's still certain setup to activate a space here. So as you can see from, A to to F and all the number to G, you can see intentionally from A, which will be rather slightly like a higher point. We can have more like a natural play area, which is taking from some of the existing character. If you remember some of that kind of eggy shape, planter wooden benches with the tree, that has been what we heard is a kind of, a spot. They feel like, hey, there's a little bit of like a park and greenery feeling, and they like the shades and all such. So some of this really taking on some of the favorite characters already exist in the current Congress Square Park and transform and kind of evolve into kind of the new form fitting into this redesigned Congress Square Park here. Also to kind of mention about in terms of this central areas here, as we call it now, the flexible plaza. And so the design was really to, like I mentioned, to accommodate really various of programs from day to night all over the time. Really the big move here in terms of the program is that, if you recall, we kind of shifted the stage from against to the building, the big building backdrop here to the corner where, B pointed to. And that was also through, really the way that how can we maximize this space to allow even larger group of people when, there's a music festival, there's a movie night, how can we accommodate these interested crowds? But at the same time, there might be people just want to pass by, not super engaged to the whole event. So we still want to balance out in terms of that, directly engaged group versus the kind of passively engaged group, and people doesn't want to be engaged group. So then we want to make sure that there's a certain kind of spatial organization that can accommodate different mode of social interaction here. Quickly, a couple kind of views just to, in a way we wanted to create a vision, but at the same time it's realistic and achievable. And you can see when summertime, the water jets activated, yoga maybe somewhat not directly in the wet zone, but somewhat is close by. The program's happening, the movable tables and chair in the background and all such, and all these Adirondack chairs, which is people recognize, that's Congress Square Park. There has been the sun-facing spot. We wanted to keep some of this tradition there. Through the fall season, some of the festivals, the ideal snowing day, the whole park actually could be somewhat artistic, just because the design language and all that to support also this holiday tradition with the holiday lights exhibition. All right, so when I touch on in terms of the social intersection, that is where we start to also look into the seating arrangement, where to sit and when. Through the winter time, through the summertime, some people prefer to be exposed under the sun. Summertime, you might need some sunshade, but again, people might want to do some sunbathing as well. Understanding how the shadow casts through this open space. We also look into, in terms of the programs, like I mentioned before, some of the larger kind of seating arrangement need to have some flexibility when there's a larger event happen. Movie nights, my space, my time is more of the time that you might have smaller group, need to be more focused, there'll be more quiet time. For people watching, I want to sit there and get to see what's going on, not necessarily directly in the event space. So here is kind of a diagram to show the seating per the social interaction needs. We can have, more like a street front. It is also interesting, kind of discuss with the city and the Friends of Congress Square, is where you want to start to show that you are inviting people to sit longer. We intentionally kind of place this wood insert that you can see more comfortably, or it might be more transitional. People sit, wait for the frame, catch up, or have a laptop there somewhat short term. Then there will be more of just this concrete seat wall without the wood insert here. Even with the wood insert, we also talk about, with the back or without the back, because again, if you want people even staying longer with the back, certainly it's more comfortable. So there's a certain level of this kind of detail, design detail, trying to send that message is welcome to sit any way, in any direction you can sit on. In addition to this, what we're not showing in this drawing is these movable tables and chair, of course, they will be adding on depending on the season and programs in that D circle area there. One more layers to kind of summarize our kind of design exercise here is in terms of utilizing planting as part of this seasonal interest and dynamic landscape to the park here. So we're working with the horticulturist, Patrick Kalina. We work really closely in terms of to come up the planting palette that will work from the streetscape threshold into the kind of the surrounding park area and into the park area. And as you can see, the circle D, we kind of call it as a boulder and plants area. So that's where we will intersect some of the plants. It might be easier to show from this side to your right-hand side. Some of that kind of New England character that people have been mentioned throughout, engagement meetings and public meeting is in terms of some of the more authentic characters. Can we find something, a little moment, and say, hey, we find it not overly done over the part, but in some kind of little moment that we can find if people discover the corner here. So we're thinking to incorporate some of the boulders, plants poking out between the scene, as some of the highlight area here. You see this side here, some of the notes around the art pieces and the back of the natural play area here. But generally, the planting scheme will be, of course, locally adaptive, and that's reasonable. So tolerant, we understand that people have been reminding us there's a lot of snow during the winter time. So whatever you guys gonna plan, that has to be, reasonable for all the harsh weather, and also, plowing the snow, dumping into the planter area and all that. Taking that into consideration, we're still refining, but happy to see kind of a palette that it can still support in terms of that dynamic landscape purpose over the season, and still reasonable to maintain over time. So again, that is kind of, this is the Congress Square Park reimagined. We've been talking about through really a more accessible special organization, through an intentionality that to carve out these pocket spots to support all kinds of programs, day to night, weekdays, weekends, and as well as the layers of the planting to make people feel like there's a seasonal change and there's a getaway moment. Through that, we're looking forward to continue work with the city and all the stakeholders in terms of implement this Congress Square, and with the Congress Square Park as the heart in this project here. Thank you today. That's my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Misa. This has been great. If you all want to put your screens back on, that's awesome. Welcome back, everyone. That's great. What I'd like to do now is, and we're still experimenting here, what I'd like to do now is, with all of you, is to break out into small groups, into breakout rooms for just a few minutes. And I'm going to create rooms, and I want you to just introduce yourselves to each other, and then talk about what came up for you listening to this. What came up for you? Was there an aha moment, or I didn't think of that, or just anything like that? And is there something that you might be able to take back with you to your own group? This will be going on for about, I'd say 10 or 15 minutes. So who wants to share anything that you all were talking about? One of the rooms said to me, "What are they talking about in the other rooms?" So what were you talking about? Tell us what you're talking about. And what came up for you? What were some aha moments, or what was like, I never thought of that? Sharon.
I just have an overall comment. I just said this to Caitlin, and she said I should say it more publicly, but I worked for UNH Cooperative Extension and Community Development for years, and I worked with a lot of towns in Southern New Hampshire, and I got to tell you that community engagement to this level is incredibly impressive. And David, I don't know how you keep all those volunteers so engaged and so passionate about what you guys do, but I've got to say hats off to you, because if it's just incredibly impressive what you've done with the Friends Group, and how well the city and Misa's company works with you all. And in putting this help and just observing how you all talk to each other and collaborate on stuff, just even for this webinar, is just incredibly impressive. So I wanted to say that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It's been interesting.
I'm sure it has.
Well, I'll say in our group, I poked at that a little bit because I thought, wow, this is so great and so inclusive and everybody gets along so well. How did you manage that? And learned that, well, that wasn't necessarily always the case at every moment along the way. And there's, struggles as well. So that made me feel better.
Well, we all are humans living in New England, where there's a lot of old school versus new school and all like that. So, yeah. So, can you elaborate, Alyssa, what you took away from what you heard about those not so smooth, or it was great relationships, but not always?
Well, I learned a little bit from David about the city and the friends prior to this process fighting over selling it or not, selling the park or not. And I was sort of comparing it to a current process in Portsmouth, looking at our parks and how this process really did, despite troubles, seem to be able to reach out in different ways with the Neighborland app, which is really interesting for the city, then with CRT's own process after that. And so we're able to reach out at different points along the way in the process, not just sort of one community forum, but continuous input was impressive.
And I would just say that, you know, because there was a lot of debate and contentiousness at the beginning, that really made us, the city, aware of the importance of this space to pretty much the whole city, and made us, you know, sit up and pay attention to how we were engaging and including people. But, you know, it's interesting that the referendum and the debate about what to do with the property came up in our group as well, but from a different angle, you know, and talking about why a park is even in this space, you know, in this very central downtown space where there could be buildings or other things. And there were historically buildings there, and it was kind of a leftover space after a UDAG federal grant tore down the buildings to benefit the hotel. And so, you know, it's evolved. I mean, the process has evolved, the space itself has evolved, you know, and it's not done yet either.
Oh, it's great. And that's one of the big questions that often happens. Why should we put this non-retail, non-tax generating piece of property in the middle of the city when we could have a building there and it's going to generate millions of dollars? And so that gets back to the question, and I think you talked about it in a couple of the rooms, was there's indirectly, it's probably added a lot of economic activity to that part of town. And the museum was always there, and there's the Children's Museum around the corner, but I'm sure that there's even more, that people want to come to the park, so they go to these other, I mean, look at Central Park in New York City. That has very little tax generating stuff in it, but people go there, and we need it, and it just adds so much. I think it's great.
I think that's also interesting to raise a question just from the social and wellness aspect, that if, you know, you think about like happy, healthy people in town and doing more business and all that, you need a kind of getaway, a little pause in that setting. And of course, I think that people can argue you can build something and do interior, some kind of space, whatever, but we still feel like that connection with the natural, even just a little moment of it, that's still very vital in terms of to keep a very healthy society in a way, or community from that point. And also, as you mentioned, just in terms of park, it also has been kind of interesting for the conversation, because when you talk about park, people think about the patch of green, like Central Park, as Robin, you just mentioned. And park, you have, you know, just basically green trees, and you can like lunch and picnic. But at the same time, because the setting and the context, it wouldn't really work in that case. So how we can balance just available green we cannot bring into this park versus, you know, the hardscape to support all other programs and events, and which can generate, you know, in a way like economic, as an economic engine in a way, because, you know, the programs and some of the things that you can bring into the space. So
right.
And the hotel and the museum and the surrounding businesses are also certainly interested in making it as best an active a space as it can be. The front door for them and a lot of visitors. You know, tourism is a big part of the economy here, and that's the first impression that they see is that space. So there's that sort of economic impact as well.
And
That was one of the issues that we had initially when we were going through the referendum, was how to put a number to the economic benefit for this park. And we never did find, there are some studies out there that people talk about the economic benefit of a park, but it's really hard to put a number on it, right? To justify not putting a building there. Another big picture thing that came out of this, when we started, as I said, there was no parks department. And from the referendum, I think a lot of people in the city were shocked that we didn't have a parks department, because we have an enormous number of parks for a little city. So out of this, we got a parks department. We have a parks manager. And I think it drove a bigger appreciation for what Portland had for parks, not just Congress Square. So
that's great. And to your point, and to Misa's point, and also yours, Caitlin, it's one thing, and we've said this before at Plan New Hampshire, that so many times decisions are made like this based on economics. How much does it cost? How much revenue could we be getting? It's all about economics, when in fact there are 3 different sections, maybe even 4, to our communities. There certainly is the economic aspect of it, but there's the social aspect, as you brought out, Misa, and there's the environmental aspect. So all of those, and they're all intertwined. So you may not be able to measure the economic impact necessarily, but the environment that's there and the social impact that it has is going to contribute to that. And then overall, you've also got the governance whole aspect of it too. But I think this is a really great example of showing that intersection of the environment and the social and the economic all working together. And I think I think particularly some of the communities in New England tend to always go to how much does it cost? No, it's going to cost too much before we do anything, without realizing those other aspects are just as important, if not more so.
Robin, there was one question in the chat box that's kind of related to this, and that is,
okay,
are you approaching local businesses for sponsorships to help offset costs?
yeah, so we talked about that in our group, but we have 2 fundraising efforts going on. So the Friends of the Park, we obviously have a yearly need. I mean, we have to raise $100,000 a year. So the Weston is one of our big supporters. There are 2 or 3 other businesses are around. So we do that with the local businesses. We write grants. We have membership drives. And then on the other hand is the rebuild part of the project, which is where the Friends Group is just one partner in that. And there's a capital campaign committee who is looking to raise, I may get the number wrong, Caitlin, $2.5 million, I think, about, because the sculpture by itself is over $1 million, the Sarah Z sculpture. And by March, we had raised almost $1 million when we had to put the campaign on hold. And I think they're going to start gearing it back up shortly. But in terms of the intersection, that's a project between the city and the state. And the park is a partnership between the Capital Campaign Committee and the city. And I think that's a 50-50 split with the park itself. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we're at time now. And I want to thank all of you, each of you and all of you, for attending this today. This was amazing. Thank you to Misa and to Caitlin and to David for taking the time to put this together for us. I think it was really, really great. Sounds great. So anyway, thank you all, and I hope we see you in a couple of weeks. And if you have any feedback or anything, let us know. If you have any ideas for future webinars, please let us know. And thanks again to each of you, and thanks again to AI in New Hampshire, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.